it sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Dealer.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Could you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
So I feel like she's got a good fighting chance for most people.
Sounds like it'll be fun. Oh, and also I wanted to tell you before we really get started here, I texted it to you, but my Aunt Carol was very emphatic on how much she has enjoyed your presence and your conversation, and she was like, he just sort of like knows stuff. He'll just like say like facts about things, and I'm like, wait, what? Really?
Yeah.
I had no idea about that. She's like, how does he know this? And I was like, he likes history.
He's
I'm
a total
nerd
facts
like me, you know?
When I was in middle school, my first middle school quote unquote girlfriend, the gift that I got for Christmas was, I think it was like a book of like amazing facts or something like that, and it was like 30,000 facts, and I memorized them.
Damn, it's a lot of facts.
And I'm not autistic.
Jury's out on that one.
My sister is convinced for some reason. All right, so if you want to give the introductions, actually, you're the host. I was about to get started.
Yeah, you're just jumping ahead of it. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Biographers. I am Daniel Newman, and with me is Akiva Miola.
Hello.
Taking a sip of water, getting ready to get going here. Akiva's doing his very first series, which I'm very, very excited about. We announced it last time, but it is going to be on, well, I shouldn't even say it, because you're probably going to give us a lovely little intro, and we'll get carried away from there. So I'll keep my mouth shut, and I'll say, let's get going here. I'm super, super excited.
I'm stoked. I'm stoked. Leonardo da Vinci has become my obsession recently. And anytime that anybody says anything about it, it's very hard for me not to just be like, well, actually. But just a little thing, I didn't write this, but all of these names are Italian, and a lot of these names are like 4 or 5 names long. So if you notice any inconsistencies or stumbling in my words as I get through this, just give me a break. I've gone through this like 10 times, and this is as smoothly as I could go. And
also, that's a shout out to all the pronunciation police out there. Which, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and say this: nobody likes you. So just pipe on down, pronunciation police, because nobody cares on like if I get something wrong, if I say mozzarella and you're like, you plebe, it's mozzarella. It's like, okay, go home. Yeah. Like nobody wants to be around you. You know what I mean? Go be friends with Giada De Laurenti, because that's who cares.
I would want to be friends with Giada De Laurenti.
Who wouldn't want to be friends?
I think that was an awakening for me.
I've never paid attention to a single recipe that she's taught, if you know what I mean.
I think it was also the food that really got me. You know, Like, I'm really happy that I'm with like my partner who's very good at cooking.
Yeah.
Because in no traditional sense, I just happen to have wanted a partner who was very good at cooking. And I think I can blame Giada for that.
That's fair. I feel Kat's a good cook. I'm not trying to say that she's not, but I would say that it wasn't necessarily something that I was looking for because I enjoy cooking so much.
Oh, true.
You know what I mean?
are. I have to try your cooking because you keep telling me about all these amazing dishes. So, okay. So before we get into our next subject, I'll start off with a little personal anecdote. When I was a child, I terrified my mom with a suggestion that I made to my grandmother, affectionately named Tanka, when I politely asked that she cut off both of her legs. While my mother was understandably worried, my Tanka, having shared my room and seen my ideas, asked me why she should do such a thing. The answer was a drawing I had made for new mechanical legs, my solution to her long-term arthritis, to which she was famous for shouting, "Ay, mi piernas!" as she got on and off the bed. She knew not to be scared because, since I could remember, I had always wanted to be an inventor. My most notable designs include a variety of limbs, a flying hot tub, and a rainwater filter system, which I still don't think was that bad.
I want to see it.
Yeah, it was actually pretty. It kind of looked a little bit like the Lincoln County process thing. I had there was like a fire
filter
on the bottom, and then there was like twisty little coils that would go up into like 2 buckets after like the water evaporated.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it was actually for filtering the water.
Yes.
I was imagining it was for filtering out debris so that the gutters could go.
So it was like a big funnel on the top. And then there was like a couple of like mesh strainers. The water would go to a basin on the bottom, and then that would get boiled, and then it would evaporate into 2 little containers on the sides.
Well, I feel like you can't give more detail because then somebody's going to steal your idea and patent it. And
Well,
you're
someone
going to be very
did.
upset.
You know what? I saw a commercial for something similar like 5 or 6 years later, and I gave up on inventing. I was 12. I was already jaded by 12.
Fair enough.
But anyway, my love for inventing was undoubtedly due to my love for all things Leonardo da Vinci. The idea of picturing Da Vinci as an old wizard character, dutifully painting classics such as the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper couldn't be farther from the truth for most of his life. Leonardo was, for the most part, an energetic, scatterbrained, drop-dead gorgeous man with an insatiable addiction to discovery. He was both the most observant man of his time, along with being the least diligent, being the creator of countless unfinished paintings, notes, and math problems. Beyond his paintings, he would design countless inventions, from forging power hammers, for which I'm grateful, to self-moving knight's armor, to machines that, if any of his patrons gave him the resources, he probably could have had people soaring through the air before we knew the Americas existed.
Wow.
He was a scholar of the world around him, unafraid to study the simple and grotesque. Da Vinci wouldn't gain worldwide notoriety for hundreds of years, but would rub elbows with the most influential and dangerous people in the Renaissance world, including several of his Ninja Turtle brethren. Da Vinci was the truest example of the Renaissance man, and it was a book on Leonardo da Vinci that became the very first thing that I knowingly stole when I was 8.
Wow.
My apologies to Beverly Hills Public Library. Now, speaking of books, I want to mention the primary source for this season's biography, Leonardo da Vinci by Walter Isaacson, as well as Leonardo da Vinci, the Universal Man by Alessandra Fregolent. Alessandra Fregolent, I want to say. She's Italian.
Sorry, Alessandra. Hopefully we got it right.
I would consider these to be the end-all, be-all source for all things Da Vinci, and Walter Isaacson's book is a thoroughly entertaining read that I would recommend to anyone.
Isn't he the guy that also did the Steve Jobs biography not long ago?
He did, yes.
Very cool.
He's a professor of history. I can't remember exactly the university, but...
I'm also fairly certain he's currently working on a biography of Elon Musk.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which he's not dead yet, so I don't know how that's going to work, but anyway.
Yeah. I'm interesting. I'll have opinions on that later. But I'll also be supplementing this with a variety of academic research articles and lectures as well, which, if we want, I can add some of those sources onto the biographer's website.
Absolutely.
I should also mention, considering that our subject is famous more for the visual arts than anything, if you follow us on our Instagram or go to the biographer's website, you can find a list of the most important images that we're discussing today.
And that is, for anybody curious, the Biographers Podcast at, just .com. I was going to say our email address, which is at gmail.com, but thebiograferspodcast.com.
Yeah. So I tried my best to make sure that this wasn't a visual podcast, but if you want to look at some of the images, they're huge milestones in his life. So I would highly recommend either checking out the Instagram or most especially going on the website. So to start off on the right foot, I looked into Leonardo da Vinci's family lineage, which can be traced back all the way to the 1300s, with the founder of the house being Ser Michel da Vinci, who was a scrupulous businessman and notary who worked to obtain money and land for the family, kind of like Ian Fleming's grandfather in that sense.
Okay.
Now, as boring as the job may sound, there was more to notarizing than simple contracts like we have today. These were often also considered works of art, including illustrations, historical references, and even creative writing. Apparently, this still didn't dazzle the next in line, who would be Leonardo's beloved grandfather. Ser Michel's son, Antonio, gave off the my dad owns a yacht kind of vibe when he was younger. Taking the title and holdings of the house after great-granddad Michel retired, Antonio seemed quite content living off the profits of the family oil and wine sales and using the money as he pleased, which eventually obviously led the family to have a bit of a dip in renown, a burden that would lean on Leonardo's father to resolve.
So this was Leonardo's grandfather.
Leonardo's grandfather, Antonio, who Leonardo would eventually be very close with.
Okay, cool.
Now, Leonardo's father, born Piero Frusino di Antonio da Vinci, wasn't quite as lazy, reclaiming the job title of notary for the city and taking on massively successful jobs in Florence by the young age of 25, working for the magistrates building, the Jewish ghettos, and even monasteries of the Catholic Church. However, that didn't mean that Piero wasn't a piece of work in and of himself. Yes, he saved the family title, but some personal stuff got a little interesting. Leonardo's father seemed to have a propensity for extracurricular hobbies, most of which included having affairs and just bothering women in general. And,
oh, God.
Yeah, it was kind of bad. In fact, the story of Leonardo's mother had been a mystery to historians since no one even bothered writing her name on the Da Vinci's birth certificate with the amount of flings that Piero would have.
Jeez.
There had been no evidence of her identity other than a single name written by Grandpa Antonio, Caterina. With the omission of her last name, it had even been guessed that Leonardo's mom was an enslaved Chinese person, considering the fact that Piero wrote documents in regards to a slave with the same name that he may have had relations with, which was a huge problem, not only ethically, but also because it was someone else's property.
Ooh,
so
gotcha.
It put the family in a big situation. He ended up having to pay off the family for a lot of money because not only did he, end up with somebody who was enslaved, but it wasn't his slave in the first place.
So the implication here is that Leonardo da Vinci was half Chinese.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. In fact, this was not the implication, but even what most historians considered for a very long period of time. In fact, it wasn't until 2017 that historians managed to reveal the story of an orphan that lived in the town of Vinci named Caterina Lippi.
Interesting.
So he ended up having relations with two Caterinas, one who was Chinese, in fact, but the other, his mother, was actually from Vinci, Caterina Lippi.
Okay, so he was not, in fact.
Yes, he was not Chinese, but that was the leading evidence up until around 2017.
Wow, very, very interesting.
Yeah. So Caterina was born and raised in Vinci to an esteemed yet pretty poor family of farmers with her younger brother, and after some financial turmoil, they were orphaned by their parents and sent to live with their grandmother. After just a year, Caterina's grandmother died, and she was forced to raise her infant brother at just 15 years old. Luckily for Caterina, she still had the advantage of a decent family name and most likely met Piero when she was around 25 at the time, in an attempt to secure income for her and her baby brother. After a brief relationship beginning in July of 1451, Caterina and Piero sealed the deal, so to speak, and baby Leonardo was expected to be on the way. Unfortunately, any hope for Caterina of getting married to Piero was tossed aside. Well into her carrying Leonardo, she found out that Piero had signed a marriage contract with another woman during her pregnancy.
What a dog!
I know! And despite the baby on the way, Piero had managed to arrange a marriage with a 16-year-old girl named Albiera, whose family were prominent shoemakers in Florence where Piero worked. And while he was a bit of a schmuck, he wasn't a monster, and made sure that Caterina didn't stay on the streets with his kid. In an attempt to keep everyone in the family, Piero helped set up a marriage between Caterina and a kiln worker and farmer tied to the Da Vinci family, named Antonio di Piero del Vaccia. His nickname was Acatabriga, which meant bully or troublemaker. Yeah. Luckily for Leonardo, Antonio was actually kind and mild-mannered, and it seemed that the nickname was more of a teasing thing because of his soft disposition. He was really friendly, known to take people into the family.
So it's like when you call a really tall guy, you call him tiny.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
They'd be like, "Hey, troublemaker, how's it going?" And
hey,
he'd be
little
like,
guy, how you doing? And they're like 6'5". Yeah,
literally.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And he was just like, a kiln worker. He'd like made ceramics. Very nice guy by all accounts.
That's what I call my cousin Charlie, who's like I think like 6'5", something like that. I'm like, hey, teeny.
Yeah. In fact, Leonardo suggests that Acatabriga would be someone he would confide in as he got older. And while the circumstances of his birth were hush-hush, Leonardo's baptism actually seemed to be very well attended, with 10 godparents giving witness despite being born out of wedlock. Now, if you ever grew up devout, this may seem a bit surprising considering his dubious origins, but as it turns out, Leonardo was brought into what some folks call the golden age for bastards. I'm not sure if you've ever heard that phrase.
Never. It just makes me think of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, while it did not always translate for lay people, aristocrats enjoyed a certain moral immunity, like they always have, in part because the Pope at the time wrote positively of bastard royalty, and it didn't hurt that the Pope had 2 illegitimate kids himself.
Ooh, scandal.
I know. Now, the privilege didn't always apply to jobs, though. And while he was accepted into, society, the Notary Guild only wanted those who were, quote unquote, fully in mainstream society. So that basically shut Leonardo out of the family business.
Again, in Game of Thrones, it's like saying, oh, he's a highborn.
Yes.
That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. So he definitely had the status of the Da Vinci family. But since he was a bastard, there were lots of job opportunities that were missed because of the bastard status. Not everybody was so progressive. And
sorry, everyone in advance. I've been re-going through Game of Thrones recently, and it's just in my brain. I'm sorry.
There's going to be lots of Game of Thrones references with this one.
Word.
Yeah.
Cool.
You'll see why.
Okay.
So, for the younger years of his life, Da Vinci split his time between 2 homes, Caterina and Troublemakers, and the family home where Grandpa Antonio would watch after him since his father Piero was in Florence most of the time. Like all deadbeat dads, Piero was known to overestimate his involvement in Leonardo's life, even to the point where he tried to file him as a dependent, and after a visit by the city, they immediately crossed his name out, seeing that he didn't live there.
He's trying to get like a little loophole in the law. I'm like, no, I take care of this kid. But in reality,
like, oh, my son, he's my number one. What's his name? Leonard, Josh. Man, that kid.
I just imagine them showing up at his like apartment and then being like, so where does he sleep? And the guy being like, just like everything
Points
is just
cat bed.
I know, right? Everything is like a bachelor pad style.
He was gonna go get me some milk and cigarettes. I just don't worry about it. With all the family issues that Leonardo had, he was certainly not an only child. After Troublemaker and Caterina's marriage, they wanted to have 4 girls and a boy, while Piero didn't manage to have a single child with the girl he left Caterina for.
Wow.
Now, Piero would eventually catch up when he got older, since after his 3rd and 4th marriage, 24 years later, Piero ended up having 11 children.
Jeez.
The first one being born when he was around 50 years old in 1476.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I think his wife was 16 at the time.
These old subjects that we cover, like in Jack Daniel, remember, it was like his parents had 11 children and then his dad had like 12 children or something. It's just crazy.
And the dad's like a geriatric. And the wife is like just out of high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Leonardo was not the type to keep a bedroom journal in his grandfather's house, and despite his adulthood of furious note-taking and artistic scribbles likely to be found on his person at all times, Da Vinci would half-jokingly consider himself an unlettered man in his adulthood. This was due to the fact that instead of attending the Latin school of his area, meant to groom the Italian elite for excellence in trading and clergy, Leonardo would find himself attending an abacus school due to his bastard status.
Wow.
Yeah, so the abacus school, as the name might imply, was meant to teach lower middle-class folks to read and write in Tuscan Italian, along with basic math skills. Now,
really quickly, I love hearing that Da Vinci, I love the humility of it, right? That somebody that we can look at and go, inarguably one of the most genius people to ever exist, would not consider themselves a lettered person, a super well-read.
Yeah.
That's just amazing.
It was honestly like a badge of honor for him.
Yeah.
He and that's kind of what I was going to say is the reason that this matters so much for Da Vinci was that he was born into an era of the Renaissance that placed particular value on recovered writings of ancient Rome, which meant that most scholarly writing was done in Latin. They were like the weeaboos of Rome. Like everything about Rome that they could copy, they would. And this often threw Da Vinci out of the circles of great thinkers during his time. And we can often see Leonardo scribbling away Latin translations in his notes whenever he tried to work with other people who were properly trained. And he was really frustrated with the language barrier. But like I said, nonetheless, he considers himself a student of experience.
Gotcha.
Right. So now it was at this very school that Leonardo would learn this unique and even mysterious method of writing that he's famous for. If you were an Italian at the time and tried to take a peep into Leo's sketchbook, you'd find yourself puzzled to see it was completely unreadable. This is known to historians as mirror script, due to the fact that one can clearly read what is written when looking at the notes through a reflection. Leonardo's fans and historians have often speculated as to why Leonardo wrote backwards, even guessing that Leonardo developed this as a secret code to hide his findings from the Catholic Church. The answer, however, it appears to be quite simple. Leonardo was left-handed.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the main method of writing for Leonardo was either charcoal or quilled ink on parchment at the time, both of which, if you've attended art class, are famous for smudging horribly. The use of the mirror script was a simple technique to prevent Leonardo from ruining his own work as he went along. And it was used by many left-handed people from this time. In fact...
So he would write from right to left to avoid that?
A bit like if you looked at your T-shirt through a mirror, that is how he wrote.
Wild.
Yeah. You know, interestingly enough, this actually ended up being a problem for a lot of scholars because, you know, only 10% of the population is left-handed. So every time they found somebody who mirror scripted in Vinci, they were like, this must be Leonardo da Vinci's work. So it was hard to sort of delineate, actually. Now, interestingly enough, while left-handedness was tolerated at the time, it was still seen by many not only as unsightly, but even evil by some superstitions.
I've heard that.
Yeah. I guess they just thought it was creepy that they couldn't read what he was writing. They thought it was secretive, that type of thing. Now, as far as the school goes, the Abacus School was the extent of Da Vinci's classroom time, and he seemed very proud of how far he made it without a formal education, like I said, toting himself to be a student of experience, which is great because his family strongly doubted he could sit and pay attention in a classroom anyway. Yeah. There are only small nuggets of childhood memories left behind by Da Vinci, having been more interested in his surroundings than sitting down for memoirs, so most of the first-hand notes from his childhood come from his later years as an old man in Florence.
Okay, interesting.
These entailed fanciful, semi-poetic retellings of observing the natural world, not really journal entries necessarily. The one that spoke to me the most was him retelling a story of hiking through the Tuscan countryside to come upon a cave, in which he discovers the bones of a whale strewn on the cave wall.
Whoa.
Yeah, really interesting.
So like actual bones in the cave?
Yes. So
wild.
He was hiking through the Tuscan countryside, ended up seeing this sort of dark cave and walked in, and there were whale bones in the limestone of the wall.
Like fossils, basically.
Pretty much. Most historians considered this a flight of fancy. However, recent excavations in the last 10 or so years have actually found all sorts of cave systems full of whale fossils.
Whoa.
And even stuff that predates what we consider evolutionarily as a whale. So Da Vinci writes that his younger self was fraught with fear looking into the dark cave before stepping in. But as always, curiosity was stronger in Leonardo's heart than fear. His exact attitude would end up serving him well for his next adventure in life. Around 1564, Leonardo's father, Piero, lost his first wife to childbirth.
Oh.
And Da Vinci's grandfather, Antonio, had also passed away.
Oh.
They were best buds.
Oh.
This came as a blow to Leonardo, having no one to keep him company in Vinci. Leonardo was coming of age as it was, so Piero decided to bring him along to where he worked. So one morning in the sleepy town of Vinci, a 12-year-old Leonardo would pack up his things to learn to paint in the cultural center of the world, Florence, Italy.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
I feel like there's so many common threads of characters through history like this where they lose these father figures early on in life and are kind of left to their own devices. Literally, Ian Fleming, his dad died in the First World War. Mm-hmm. Jack Daniel, his dad died when he was 15 or 16. It's just there's this crazy repetition of this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And him and Piero would end up eventually having a decent relationship, but I don't think that it was necessarily fatherly him and Antonio. Antonio took care of him.
Right.
You know, Piero was very busy trying to fix his dad's mistake of completely tanking the family business. And I probably, you know, as much as I am very judgmental of some of Piero's decisions with being a father, a lot of his decisions come from the fact that Antonio was a much better father to Da Vinci than he was to Piero.
Wow.
But, you know, as they moved to Florence, Italy, it kind of turns out to be a subject just as interesting as the life of our main protagonist. So before we move on to Leonardo's next milestone, let's kind of unpack why. What made Florence one of the most turbulent forces in the Renaissance world is also what made it a petri dish for profound thinkers, historians, architects, and artists. It was a unique blend of secular government along with unhinged one-percenters doing their best to line pockets and show off.
Okay.
Very classic.
Okay.
Now, Florence in the 1400s was, in the loosest terms, considered a republic.
Okay.
The system for election was kind of wild, so long as you were a land-owning man, free of debt, and quote-unquote well-connected. Your name was tossed into a big leather bag, and if your name was pulled, you became the leader of the entire city-state.
Wait, like name out of a hat, and that's how you became the leader?
Actually, yes.
Oh my gosh.
You know, previous to this, there was the Black Plague, and you know the Catholic Church was beginning to crumble a little bit, and there was wars between all the city-states. So like they were pretty much just like, I guess we're gonna pull a lottery.
It's just amazing to think that, and then Florence having the reputation that it has for still the cultural kind of epicenter of it all, and it's this massive movement of art and thinkers and everything, and it's like, who do we elect as leader? I don't know, grab a bag, toss some names in.
Yeah. Now, and there's definitely some addendums to this. Lots of strings are pulled in this time.
Okay.
Each term only lasted for about 2 months, and generally speaking, it worked. Having the range change so often meant that a variety of families could get their hand in the pot without sticking around for too long. There were, of course, the exceptions. It was not uncommon for coups, counter-coups, quiet assassinations, and loud assassinations, depending on the offender. The group most famous for this was, of course, La Famiglia Medici.
And now you tell me, but this also feels like a situation that is ripe for corruption, in that they're like, we're going to pull names out of a hat, and somebody goes, well, can you put my name in 300 times?
That's kind of exactly where I'm getting at.
Okay.
It must have been magic, but that leather bag had always tended to pull a Medici-associated name out of it, and when it didn't, it did.
Okay.
The Medicis, while certainly not the only powerful family in Florence at the time, had their fair share of tentacles reaching into all sectors of society. This, strangely, wasn't all that bad. In order for families like the Medici to stay on top, they needed to use their wealth to legitimize themselves. This often meant producing civic works like bridges, gardens, and fountains in the center of town. Along with public works, the Medici would use their gold to stay on the good side of the Catholic Church, using their wealth to fund lavishly adorned churches, monasteries, and cathedrals. If you're imagining House Lannister from Game of Thrones, you're getting the picture.
Okay.
In a town where literally half the population was wiped out 100 years ago due to the Black Plague, the value of work in general had seriously gone up. And families like the Medici were all too willing to shell out florins to make sure things were not only under control, but also flashy.
And I'm sorry, can you say that again? How many people died? How recently?
Oh, half the population.
And that was just like a generation prior kind of a thing?
Yes, about 100 years ago. Yeah,
oh my
so
gosh.
2 generations, because everybody dies when they're like 60 here.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah, the cost of work, the middle class had grown massively because a lot of poor people ended up getting very sick, especially in slums and areas that were very crowded. So it unfortunately kind of weaned the population to make a more wealthy society, essentially. Unlike the billionaires of today, stashing most of their wealth in investments and offshore banks, the Medicis would consider it a wise investment to become patrons of famous artists and architects. So long as the house had room for everyone, no one cared who lived on the top floor. That being said, what would Leonardo da Vinci see as he took his first steps into Florence? Well, if you like to play games, Assassin's Creed 2 is not only an undeniable classic, but gives a decently faithful rendition of what you might expect. The city over the last few decades had undergone a transformation. Streets were kept comparatively clean, with buildings downtown adorned in ornate neoclassical style meant to copy their Roman ancestors. Florence was also noted for having the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, which you might have climbed in-game.
I was going to say, that sounds so familiar to me. Did you have, is that one of the pictures that you have on here?
Yes, it is.
Ooh, let me look it up really quick.
Yeah.
I honestly do remember climbing this in Assassin's Creed 2. That is really
there was a
funny.
hay bale right at the top of the dome, which we'll get into, actually.
Luckily,
Leonardo gets involved in that
you're
dome.
able to just, dive off of towers, and there's always miraculously just a giant cushion at the bottom of it. So those assassins are lucky folks.
Exactly. What is a cathedral without its religious hay bale?
Yeah, and the surrounding hay bales for good measure.
That might be the one transgression, is there quite not as many on-ramps for the top of buildings and not as many bales of hay. But that, maybe that is not true, actually, because there were a lot of horses. So, who knows?
Hey, that's true.
It was a stunning cathedral, hand-carved by masons so ornately that you could spend a full day circling it and finding something new. At the time, it was the largest in the world.
Wow.
Festivals lined the streets often and repeatedly, with plays both public and private being held on a regular basis. Around the time that Leonardo would set foot in the city, there would be around 83 woodcarvers, over 80 silk spinners, 44 goldsmiths, and 30 master rank painters, including Leonardo's eventual frenemy, Botticelli.
Frenemy?
Mm-hmm. We'll get into that next episode.
Okay.
In fact, in an effort to showboat more, the Medici family eventually decided to remove all butchers in town square and centralize the goldsmithing industry there, so that it would be the first thing that travelers would see as they set foot on the cobblestone streets.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Basically saying, we're the wealthiest. You walk into the center of town, all there is gold adorning the streets, right?
Pretty radical. Sounds awesome.
The Medici were a banking clan, most especially, so this is, very beneficial for them.
Okay.
Now, the beauty of all this was that these trades did not work in a bubble. Goldsmiths would work to inlay painters' frames and make gold leaf. Silk spinners would work with tailors who would make incredible clothing for actors and wealthy customers alike. It might not seem like much, but over 30% of the citizens of Florence could read and write in a time where there were no laws to promote learning whatsoever.
That is pretty impressive.
Yeah. It's funny because when we were talking about Jack Daniels, we were like, 30% can only read and write. But thinking about 1450, 30% can read and write.
Actually, I don't know if we said any percentage in Jack Daniel. I'd be curious to know what it was around that time. It wasn't many. There was many illiterate people, so I don't know.
Yeah. Now, in the words of a first-hand account, Benedetto Dei, who is an Italian poet and historian who knew the Medicis, he would say this about the city. Beautiful Florence has all 7 of the fundamental things a city requires for perfection. First of all, it enjoys complete liberty. Second, it has a large, rich, and elegantly dressed population. Third, it has a river with clear, pure water and mills within the walls. Fourth, it rules over castles, towns, lands, and people. Fifth, it has a university in both Greek and accounting are taught. Sixth, it has masters in every art. And seventh, it has banks and business agents all over the world.
Damn, Florence.
Yeah. I wanted to do that in an Italian accent, but I tried it. It just didn't work.
It's also, I'm in the current series that I'm going through, there's a lot of quotes that should be in a German accent, and I'll just say that I've tried it too, and I'm like, I'm going to lose so much of the plot in the quote if I'm like trying to fake a German accent, so I'm probably going to skip it, so I feel you.
Saying an Italian word with an Italian accent is one thing, but saying English with an Italian accent, I can't do.
The thing about the Florence is...
È clear pure water. Wahoo!
Exactly. It turned into Mario really quickly.
Yeah, immediately. Or like vampire. For some reason, I always got vampire by the end of it.
Isn't that technically like Albanian or something like that?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know.
Yeah,
anyway, banking would also play a major role in Florentine success with the invention of double entry bookkeeping, which could keep track of both debits and credits. The city currency, called the florin, became a favorite currency for traders across the old world, being famous for its gold purity. You'll also see that a lot in like pirate movies and films. They talk about florins a lot.
It's so crazy to think about that dot connecting of like, of course it's from Florence.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Stuff like this was what kept Leonardo and his employers in the green. Now that we've set the scene, it's time to return to our young Leonardo, barely a teenager, but entering into the world of fine art as a young apprentice. At home, Da Vinci was no slob in the arts, having taken a great interest in it with the help of old texts his father kept in the Vinci family home. The bottega was a completely different animal, however. Da Vinci's father, Piero, had notarized for a master painter by the name of Verrocchio, a man who studied under none other than the great Donatello. Ooh. First Ninja Turtle, we got to keep count. Now, like I said, Piero managed to hook Leonardo up with Verrocchio, who is the master painter who worked under Donatello. Luckily for him, Verrocchio decided to take on a 13-year-old Leonardo as his apprentice. Now, a little bit about the master. Andrea del Verrocchio was only one of 5 bottega art masters in the city of Florence, with an art studio that might seem a little bit different than your typical gallery you'd see today. True to the time of the Renaissance, someone passing by from the outside would more likely look in and see it as a workshop than the center responsible for creating fine art. The top floor housed Verrocchio's living quarters, with the bottom serving as a store and workroom, capable of creating works of paint, metal, woodworking, and even masonry. I get into it a little bit later, but he also made armor, which I think was really interesting.
Really quick question for you, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
is you've said bottega, it sounds like with a T. Is that what it is, or am I... Okay, because I always know of, like, you know, you go to New York and you're like, go to the bodega and get yourself a snack, like, you know, with a D.
They are linguistically connected because it essentially means shop.
Gotcha. Oh, okay.
Workshop.
I didn't know that either.
But yeah, it's bottega.
Okay, cool.
Meeting the interests of the upper crust of society, Verrocchio and his crew were responsible for churning out large amounts of fine art, often as a group effort. It was not uncommon for these paintings to go out the door unsigned, considering how many hands may have worked on it. Luckily for Verrocchio, he was quite well connected, something that would keep him paid and well fed. In fact, when Leonardo first came to his studio, the shop was in full swing in the creation of a tomb for the notorious Famiglia Medici, along with a bronze statue of Jesus, silver inlaid taffeta, and a fully curated collection of all of the Medici antiques. Wow. So basically, this guy was in. You know, he was part of the Medici crowd, which basically meant upper crust of society.
It probably meant he also had a good bit of money? Or not necessarily?
More like he never needed anything, not like he had a lot of money. Basically, like, you know, never had to really worry about rent as long as the paintings kept flowing in, managed to keep lots of advisors and staff. I would probably put him in like the pay range of like a surgeon, not the pay range of like a millionaire.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
So
still doing well for himself.
Yes, up like 1%, but not the 0.01%, which is more of like the people that he ends up selling his paintings to.
Gotcha.
Now, despite the level of work that young Leonardo was walking into, he absorbed it like a sponge. Verrocchio was right up his alley, and by all accounts, it got along quite well. Verrocchio was a master of all of his trades, but like Leonardo, he was known for getting bored easily. He was known for keeping paintings unfinished for years, and that trait would eventually pass on to Leonardo as he got older. Now, as a teacher, he was no slouch. See, Verrocchio was actually very excited to have this young man enter his shop after seeing what Leonardo could do without any training. Verrocchio was considered an honest man with a penchant for humor, cracking jokes, and keeping a small library of comedy books in his living space upstairs. I tried to find them, couldn't, but it's kind of cute that he just was like, book of jokes, you know?
For sure.
In an artistic sense, he was a humanist, devoted to showing his subjects for what they truly looked like, not a perfect form like the artists that came before him. Less ideal, more real was the idea for most humanist artists at the time, which is lucky for us because that means we can actually see what Leonardo da Vinci really looked like as a boy.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's also, it makes me laugh hearing about this because it feels like both of these guys had ADHD to some capacity.
Yes.
Because I joke about this where it's like, if somebody goes, oh, do you read a lot? And I go, I've started a lot of books.
That is most definitely the connection, and it's funny because I'm thinking about all the times that Verrocchio was probably pissed off at Leonardo for not finishing something, and then would turn around and be like, "Oh yeah, I forgot the Medicis wanted that painting 6 months ago. That's in my closet. I need to," there
are so many things like that where I'm just like, dude, I've started so many things and then I haven't finished them. You know, it's anyway.
Yeah, it would pass on to Leonardo most definitely. Now, 14-year-old Leonardo was also considered to be an excellent subject for painting and sculpture due to his cheerfully youthful, boyish good looks. It was so much so that 16th century Italian historian Vasari would write that Leonardo had, quote, a beauty of body beyond description, a splendor that rejoiced the most sorrowful of souls. Basically saying, like, he was an adorable little kid, right? Yeah. And made an excellent subject for Verrocchio when he was an apprentice. A lot of apprentices will just start off by being models because lots of people will end up wanting, you know, sculptures of youths, of kids, of boys, maybe their family members, that type of thing. So that's kind of what Leonardo did when he first started.
He sounds like he's one of those children, and I think you know what I'm talking about here, that it's like there are certain times that you see a child, and they could be 5 years old, and you just go, oh, you're one of the beautiful people.
Yep.
And you're going to grow up to be a beautiful person, and you're going to continue to be a beautiful person. You just have the genetic gift.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. There was no ugly phase for Leonardo.
Yeah.
And we can actually see that visually. We actually know what Leonardo looked like exactly because of a bronze sculpture that Verrocchio did named David.
It's of Da Vinci, actually?
Yeah.
Is there a picture of that by any chance anywhere?
Yes, we do have that in the list.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there he is. Okay, interesting. I want to see if there's a better picture of his face. Oh, yep, there we go. More. Okay. Look at that. God, this is so gross to say. Look at that taut young boy.
You know what? If we're talking about the time period, I'm sure there were lots of men who said the exact same thing.
Sorry, that felt weird saying that. But anyway.
Oh my God. I think Verrocchio would have agreed.
Did Verrocchio kind of have the hots for him or something?
No, but it was really common at this time for older masters in Roman history. If you don't know, people
and in Greek history too,
and
right?
Greek people like philosophers or great artists would often have apprentices that they sometimes had relations with, or at the very least, and most commonly, just appreciated their good looks.
Okay. Okay.
It didn't always end up becoming a romantic thing, and we kind of talk about something similar in episode 2.
Okay.
But definitely in the same sense that we find the female form really beautiful in sculpture and paint today, they found like a young man's form to be very beautiful in sculpture and paint, and sometimes not necessarily a man.
I was going to say, I think we're using the term young man a little bit loosely there, but
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, a little, definitely gross by today's standards. But I suppose like oftentimes you have to do in history is go, hey, different place, different time, different set of standards, different.
Because you wouldn't
not condoning this.
You wouldn't
but
find a person who thought that was gross at that time.
Right. That was a normal thing for that culture.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, like I said, it was the same charm that would be wrought in bronze by Verrocchio's David, a sculpture that would have a beaming young Leonardo standing proudly next to the head of Goliath, wearing a Roman military skirt and a Roman sword. Once again, the humanist influence. If you've only seen Michelangelo's David, this sculpture seems a bit offbeat with such a young subject being the famous biblical character. Personally, I find it super interesting. Having this cocky, young portrayal adds a bit of mischief to the character. He kind of looks like he's up to no good a little bit. Verrocchio was also a master of anatomy, and kind of like you were saying, he managed to depict every small muscle group portrayed perfectly on Leonardo's likeness.
I was going to say, if for anybody out there that looks at the statue, I just saw the picture of it. I totally get what you're saying, too. And to me, not that I'm some biblical scholar or anything like that, from my understanding, though, when David slew Goliath, according to the tradition, he was a young man. He was like 13 or 14 or something like that, wasn't he? I want to say. Anyway, people can correct me there.
I believe that's correct. And, 13 or 14, you're practically a grown adult by biblical standards.
You're ready to get married now by that point in time.
Yeah, so when Leonardo wasn't posing for the old master, Verrocchio was a prolific teacher. All of his students learned the basics of goldsmithing and masonry, along with surface anatomy, countless drawing and painting exercises, and most importantly to Leonardo, geometry. See, perspective paintings had become extremely popular at the time. And with cameras being out of stock for the next 400 years, artists had to use good old-fashioned math to keep things in perspective. Leonardo fell in love with the idea of using geometry, constantly scribbling equations and diagrams in his notes at random. In fact, it was the very tomb that the Bottega was working on when Leonardo first arrived that Verrocchio would decorate on the outside with geometric shapes, including a circle sitting within a square, which would eventually find its way surrounding Leonardo's Vitruvian Man.
Fascinating. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but wasn't really the idea of the time of the Renaissance, wasn't that kind of based on the revival of old Greek paintings that had figured out perspective?
Yes. Yeah.
There we go.
In fact, Vasari talks about how ancient Roman historians would say that the painters of the time were so good that they could fool birds into thinking that paintings of grapes were real.
Wow.
And that was what Renaissance painters were trying to copy as well.
Okay.
So Renaissance was copying Rome, Rome was copying Greece, and Greece was copying Egypt and Mesopotamia. So it's kind of a...
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. If you look at a lot of sculptures from late era Egyptian History, big influence for Greek sculptors.
Crazy. I had no idea.
Verrocchio, it seemed, gave Leonardo one of the first tools young Da Vinci would need to unlock the secrets of the universe around him, which was geometry. Like I said, not something that I think I would be scribbling notes about, but very helpful, and I'm very glad that Leonardo liked it because that kind of moved us forward in history.
Totally.
As for Da Vinci's personal life as a young teen, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot written about him. Any notes attributed by Da Vinci at the time tend to involve his studies at the bottega, along with his classic questioning and rambling about the world around him. For the most part, it seemed that Da Vinci spent almost all of his time in the shop, and then walked back to his father's place after work was over. While there aren't any confessions or diaries, Da Vinci does later write a poem of sorts later on in his life that many historians believe described how he felt about finally moving to Florence with his dad. In one of Leonardo's writings, he portrays a rock sitting lonely on a grassy hill, which represents his hometown. As the writing goes, the rock says, "What am I doing amongst these plants? I want to live in the company with my fellow stones." So the rock rolls down the hill into the road below. After a while, it found itself in continual distress from the wheels of carts, the iron hooves of horses, and the feet of passers-by. One rolled over, another trod upon the rock. Sometimes the stone raised itself up a little so it could see the place it once was, which it now saw as a place of solitude and tranquil peace. This is what happens to those who live a life of solitary contemplation and choose to come to dwell in cities among peoples full of intimate evil.
I would really, really fascinating. And all I can think of is the song by Bob Dylan, "Like a Rolling Stone." How does it feel to be like a rolling stone without a home, like a complete unknown? Like I don't know. Knowing Bob Dylan and what he would take from Shakespeare and everything, this feels like he had to have read this poem at some point and gone, okay, here we go.
It's very likely. This poem was pretty famous, and Leonardo always had sort of a love-hate relationship with Florence. He felt like it was a community, but also that, like many people who live in a big city, it's really hard. You miss the time where you were alone and had fresh air, and there weren't so many people bumping into you, feeling like you always had to apologize or snake through crowds and deal with sort of the issues that come with living in a really big city community.
Yeah, the quietness, the stillness of the countryside where you can just sit and think and not be bothered kind of a thing. I fully understand that too.
Yeah, and especially as a teenager. You know, it's safe to say there were growing pains for Leonardo to conquer on a personal level. Leonardo seemed to think that the grass is always greener on the other side because as he got older, he would both encourage his students to go out in nature and be inspired, but would also contradict himself by saying drawing in company is much better than alone. So like I said, conflicted. He liked the community, but he also hated the competition to some extent.
But he just said that drawing in company was preferable, right?
Yes. So he liked drawing in company, but he also was sick of everybody. Like most people, everybody says, oh, I want to live out in the middle of nowhere and just, have a farm. And then they realize that chickens are actually really hard and you miss your friends and all of your friends are in the middle of town and the drive is like now 45 minutes.
I would also
very similar situation with him.
Add to it that it feels like the situation where he's going, I don't love people, but I really like being around artists.
Yes.
Which I can also understand.
It would seem that the first 3 years of Da Vinci's apprenticeship was filled with hard and forgotten work. But as he turned 18 around 1470, historians would find stories, writings, and even art studies which are now attributed to him. As I said before, Verrocchio would have students practice together often, with one such practice being a drapery study. This will be the first image that you can look up now. Verrocchio would take a piece of clay, knead it into a complex shape, and then lay a sheet of cloth dipped in plaster on top of it. After it dried, Verrocchio would shoot light from all sorts of different angles onto the drapery and have his students gather around and paint it, using only black and whitewash on a thin sheet of linen.
I'm looking at it. It is gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, so the idea of this was to teach students how to paint complex, sort of three-dimensional shaded objects, such as, billowing dresses, that type of thing. And Leonardo excelled at this, as you can tell. And
yeah.
Folks, if you're able to, check this one out on our website. When I first saw it, I could have sworn it was a photo.
It looks like a photo. I mean, it is realistic. Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
Yeah, Da Vinci was able to produce something so astoundingly real with just the use of black and white because of his deeper comprehension of the world around him. When teaching new students in his later years, Da Vinci would write, quote, "The first intention of the painter is to make a flat surface display a body as if modeled and separated from this plane. And he who surpasses others in this skill deserves most praise. This accomplishment, with which the science of painting is crowned, arises from light and shade, or we may call chiaroscuro."
I've heard of that. I remember it.
Yes.
I'm not going to make the reference, but it was from an old Strong Bad when he's doing Trogdor. I don't know if you remember Trogdor.
I don't think I remember that one.
Anyway, we can move on.
Well, I remember it from art class. Chiaroscuro, from the Italian for light and dark, quite literally, is the technique of using only highlights and shadings to produce a three-dimensional shape. While this was certainly a step in the right direction, Leonardo began to notice something wrong with his paintings. He noticed that the natural world didn't have hard lines that define each object in space, while most paintings did. Later on, thinking back on his time at the Bottega, he wrote, quote, "Your shadows and lines should be blended without lines or borders in the manner of smoke losing itself in the air." These lineless, fuzzy borders would take on the Italian word for smoke, sfumato.
Sfumato.
Sfumato. If you've done any artwork, you've probably heard of sfumato technique.
I've done some artwork and I've never heard of it.
Yeah. Essentially, Leonardo became the pioneer of this.
Wow, okay.
Now, Da Vinci was also known to do a few side projects in his spare time, and while there is still speculation on this story, it was simply too good for me not to share, in my opinion. According to the Renaissance historian Vasari, who we mentioned earlier, Ser Piero was approached by a peasant in Vinci who carved a family shield for himself. The peasant gave Piero a couple of bucks to bring the shield with him to Florence and have it painted with a dragon. So Piero gave it to his son, now having been an apprentice for several years. Now, Leonardo went full on with this painting, and in the end, it was so realistic and terrifying, Vasari wrote that Piero almost had a heart attack seeing it in the dim candlelight of the Bottega.
Jeez, that's cool.
So he goes to pick up this dragon, and it's kind of hidden behind some drapes. When he goes to pick it up in the Bottega, turns the corner, sees it, freaks the fuck out.
It was too metal.
Yeah. And now Vasari was like kind of like Herodotus a little bit, where it was history with a little bit of pizzazz.
Sure.
So, we can't take all of the stories.
Kind of like what we do?
Yes. With more liberties.
Okay.
But anyway, Piero knew it was too good to sit in some peasant's house, so he kept his son's shield and commissioned another from a lesser artist. Now, later on, Piero would sell the shield to a merchant for 100 ducats, and the gallerist resold it for 300 ducats to none other than the Duke of Milan, who would be visiting for a festival. That actually lines up historically, so there's a chance that the story is actually true.
Okay.
In today's dollars, the final asking price for the wooden shield would have been $7,800. Or if you were to convert the gold value of the currency, $41,400 for Leonardo's apprentice shield.
Wow.
Unfortunately, this particular shield has been lost to time, and it seems that Piero never gave Leonardo the money he made selling his work.
Aww.
Yeah, he never told him that he sold the shield or anything like that.
So a little bit of a crook.
Yeah, he's kind of a schmuck. He's like, tax man, I gotta take care of some stuff, kid. There is some evidence to back up this story, considering Da Vinci would end up writing instructions on how to paint fantasy creatures realistically. He loved fantasy. Da Vinci wrote, quote, "If you wish to make an imaginary animal invented by you appear natural, let us say a dragon, take for that the head of a mastiff or hound, for the eyes a cat, for the ears a porcupine, and for the nose a greyhound, the brows a lion, the temple of an old cock, and the neck of a terrapin."
You said temple of an old cock.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
I couldn't help that one.
And for the people who are actually serious and don't know what a terrapin is, apparently it's a type of turtle, which I never knew.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
Cool.
A year or two later, one of Da Vinci's formative memories was watching Verrocchio masterfully coordinate a feature of both art and engineering when he was around 18 years old, the same time that he made this shield. They decorated and hoisted a 2,000-pound sphere that would sit upon the dome at the Florence Cathedral that we talked about earlier. You probably have stood on top of the little golden cross in Assassin's Creed. First carved in stone, the ball had to be clad in copper so that it could be gilded in pure gold. Now, they didn't have welders, so they used massive sun lenses that would superheat the copper at the joints to melt them together.
Whoa.
Yeah. Very interesting.
That is radical.
Yeah, so basically think like, Archimedes' death ray. They would use that and have to...
I don't know what that is, but that sounds cool.
Well, it's basically a giant glass lens that concentrates the power of the sun into a single point so you can weld with it.
Jeez.
It took a massive amount of skill and effort by glass blowers and polishers to make these sheets of glass in just the right way that they would focus the sunlight. The quote-unquote welder would have to calculate the angle of the sun and the perfect distance in order to concentrate the heat enough to make the copper melt.
That is insane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Leonardo was so fascinated by these lenses that he would draw them into his designs over 200 times throughout his life. He would remember this job so fondly that he would write about it in his notes almost 40 years later, writing, quote, "Remember how that ball of Santa Maria del Fiore was welded together in sections?" He used that all the time for all sorts of different techniques.
Interesting.
Astounded by it.
And this ball, just to get a visualization of it or whatever, it's stone in the core and then surrounded by copper and then gilded with gold over all of that.
Exactly.
Wow, okay.
And 2,000 pounds, so like, the weight of a Honda Civic.
That is insane.
Now, it would seem that all of the public works being produced around this time were being made in preparation for a guest to arrive in the city. In 1471, festivities were in preparation for the Duke of Milan, Galeazzo Maria Sforza. While Sforza plays a short part in our story, I went down a small rabbit hole learning about the man's significance because Leonardo would have another brush in with the Sforza family later. This guy was wild. He came into town at the request of the Medici since they were looking for an alliance with military power, and this guy seemed to have it. He was known to be extremely cruel and lustful, forcing men and women in his court to bed him against their will and committing cruel acts to common folk. Like, we're talking like a Joffrey type character.
Yeah, dude.
Just evil dude. Really, like, in one story, for instance, Sforza sees a farmer catching a rabbit after his order to ban hunting, and as punishment, he makes the peasant swallow the rabbit whole right in front of him.
What?
Causing the peasant to choke to death.
What?
So he's like, "Oh, you decide to hunt without my permission? Eat the rabbit." And they were like, okay. He's like, "No. Eat it now, whole, with the fur on," and basically choked this man to death publicly for hunting a fucking rabbit.
That is, that is very Joffrey-esque.
Yes. Naturally, the leaders of Florence decided that this guy deserves a party. So it was up to the artists of the city to host a banquet with every artisan from sculptor to barber showing off their best work. Now, Verrocchio's bottega was hired by Lorenzo de' Medici to decorate the Duke's quarters, as well as produce a splendid set of armor for him. Luckily for everyone involved, he would end up assassinated just 5 years later.
Much like Joffrey.
Yeah, pretty much. It's kind of almost like an election by assassination, as Dan Carlin would put it. One of Da Vinci's first accredited drawings is of the Duke in what seems to be the armor that Verrocchio's shop made. I would venture to say that Leonardo didn't really like the man very much, considering the way that he's depicted, which is basically a wrinkly, ugly man with a triple chin and a saggy face.
That is honestly okay. It was funny you said Joffrey, because I was like, but in my mind, I'm getting this like kind of fat, possibly bald, really vile.
Yes.
I'm thinking like, I know you have you seen Dune Part 1?
No, but I've seen clips.
Okay, it's the who am I thinking of? The Harkonnen, the head of the Harkonnen household, the big chunky guy who's like, "Yes, this is my Dune," and he's got the big double chin and he's disgusting. Anyway,
that's kind of the first Duke of Sforza.
Baron Harkonnen. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yes, just wrinkly, old, mean-looking guy. He was supposed to paint the helmet, but then he also decided to draw his face too, and it wasn't very flattering. I think it stayed in his notebook for a reason.
There's also something pinging in my brain that feels like there was a character like this in Assassin's Creed 2, but anyway.
Probably. There are going to be lots of people that are in the Assassin's Creed plotline that show up in this. I just was not going to replay Assassin's Creed while I was researching this because I did not have time, but I wanted to. Now, despite the reason for the plays in town, Da Vinci was known for his love of theater and festivities altogether. The Medicis held plays and festivals all the time, and Leonardo loved them. They would retell folk tales along with ones from the Bible, setting up a stage in the middle of town with extremely elaborate sets. In fact, the very cranes that were used for the Copper Cathedral Ball were used to make the actors soar through the sky, depicting angels or Jesus ascending to the heavens. So these actors would be like sometimes 70 feet in the air, 80 feet in the air. Obviously, they didn't have OSHA back then. And they would like just basically hoist them up and do the whole play in front of the town, and everybody would gather around the town square, and Leonardo loved that shit.
I'm continuously amazed by how old certain traditions are. Right? I don't immediately think of the Renaissance and think of plays, let alone plays with acrobatics
Or circus, yeah.
right? In that are going on to like a Peter Pan style. We're gonna fly, and we lift them up with the little whatever ropes and pulleys.
If they
and
can
stuff.
make the cathedral, they can definitely carry a person.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's just I'm continuously amazed by it.
Just after I wrote this part, Shalane and I went to a circus, and I just had like a moment where I was like, I'm literally him. Like, whoa, dude. I'm basically Da Vinci. Yeah, so Da Vinci not only watched these all the time, but he was also known to design sets for the plays, along with theatrical contraptions like moving stage props and even pulley systems to move the props into the sky easier. Leonardo was also an avid musician, winning lyre playing competitions throughout his time in Florence, often accompanied by singing with improv songs. We don't have any of his writings because basically everything he did was improv.
That's insane. I didn't know he was a musician.
Yes, and honestly, a lot of people in Florence would probably have known him better as Leonardo, the guy who
The
plays,
minstrel.
Yes, the guy who plays the lyre like a violin.
Leonardo da Minstrel.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So it was at this very time that we get to see Leonardo's first confirmed and recorded invention, the air screw. The name was an apt description. The design consisted of a spiral frame and stretched cloth around a central axis, appearing kind of like an auger bit intended to drill through the sky. It was this same design that would inspire the invention of the helicopter several hundred years later.
I'm also imagining that the old footage of the umbrella that goes up and down. It feels like it's of that ilk kind of a thing.
Yes, and we'll get into that whole umbrella thing too. It was this same design, like I said, that would inspire the invention of the helicopter. Walter Isaacson speculates that Da Vinci's first version of the air screw was more of a fanciful stage prop since it had no substantial way of spinning the propeller.
Gotcha.
Right? Personally, I don't think that that's true. Leonardo mentions in his notes to pack the holes in the fabric with cornstarch so that it's airtight and has more lift. I don't think he would write that down if he didn't think that it could fly.
Yeah.
My guess is that he was less concerned about the motor and how it spun and more concerned with the main mode of flight, the propeller. I think the design was just for the propeller, and he would figure out eventually how to make it spin.
Gotcha.
But I don't think it was a stage prop. And he never really got around to finishing the invention, obviously, because that's kind of his whole MO.
Most of his inventions like that, he doesn't actually he never got to make them, right?
No. No one ever really took him seriously because they're like, no way could we fly. And Leonardo's like, I think we could fly.
That's insane.
Unfortunately, due to the unorganized writing style of Leonardo's notes, it's almost impossible to properly date any of his inventions. But it would also be around this time that he might draw a sketch for a parachute that he works on later on when he moves to Milan.
Wow.
Yeah. So as a little tidbit, when he was out enjoying the theater, Da Vinci was in love with fashion as well. He was a fan of rose and pink brocade tunics, which he liked to cut down to the knee so he could show a little bit of leg.
Oh.
Yeah, that got people going. By the age of 19, he was stunning, and while he enjoyed the attention, we won't really get any juicy details about his personal life until episode 2.
Okay.
So now that some time has passed, Da Vinci's art skills would improve dramatically, and in 1472, it would cause one of the great dramas of art history. Da Vinci is now 20 years old, getting ready to finish up his apprenticeship with Verrocchio when his master approaches him with a painting depicting John baptizing Jesus in a river along a rocky hillside. And so far, it looks as excellent as any other Verrocchio's other work. As the historian Vasari tells us, Verrocchio paints all of the characters in the painting so far: Jesus, John, and one of the 2 angels which are planned to sit on the riverside.
Okay.
Verrocchio leaves the last angel for Da Vinci to paint, and when he returns, he is completely dumbfounded. Next to his respectable yet stiff depiction of a boy with a halo above his head is a radiant face, its body twisting impressively in extravagant robes, looking so lovingly at the 2 Bible characters with an expression that makes the halo seem kind of redundant. Verrocchio stepped back, so overwhelmed by his pupil surpassing his own skill that he swore to never pick up the brush again.
Whoa! The student becomes the master, quite literally.
Mm-hmm.
And is this the one?
Yep.
And it's on the right, I'm assuming?
So the bottom corner, that one angel.
Wow.
And if you compare the other poses, it's just so much more, I don't know, angelic.
The thing to me that stands out the most is if you look between the characters, and again, for everybody that's curious, we're just talking about a painting right now. You can see it on our website. The thing that stands out to me the most is the arm on the angel.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually see the definition of the muscle and the ligaments and the hands and the legs and the toes and everything. And then you look at, I'm assuming that's Jesus who's being baptized. Yeah. He's just smoother. There's no other way to describe it. There's less detail there. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's amazing.
Now, by all historical records, this actually appears to be true. Verrocchio wouldn't pick up a paintbrush, but if you haven't noticed yet, Vasari, the historian that we're working with, kind of had a love for the dramatic, and he doctored it a little bit.
Okay.
While it is true that Verrocchio quit painting, we know that the two of them actually stayed on good terms, because when Leonardo da Vinci's apprenticeship was finally complete in that same year of 1472, he decided he would stay on in the good company of his bottega, now as a paid master.
Wow.
And that is where we will end episode 1 of Leonardo da Vinci.
I'm sad because I want to know more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now he's on his own. He's completed the apprenticeship. He's done some studies on shading. He's done some sculpture work. He's literally hoisted a 2,000-pound ball into the sky to be put on top of a dome in a cathedral that's the biggest in the world. And now he's essentially being paid, but he's still staying in the same shop with Verrocchio. They're probably still buds.
It feels like this lesson, kids, of stay curious and keep doing what you love. Mm-hmm. And if you work hard enough at it, you could be a Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah. And the thing is, Leonardo da Vinci didn't know that he was Leonardo da Vinci. He was just a guy who just liked to enjoy stuff.
Few do.
Context is everything, because there's so many of Leonardo's discoveries, inventions, and paintings that were like, hey, that's pretty good for this time in history. That's probably what, his peers would have said. But now we're like, the Mona Lisa or Salvador Dali is the most expensive painting in the world, worth $450 million. And Leonardo painted that.
That's insane, man. Dude, absolutely excellent. Absolutely excellent. High praise. I genuinely am like, oh, dude, come on, let's keep going. I want to know more. This is cool. Lovely job, dude.
Yeah, I'm not quite as ahead of my writing as Daniel is normally. I have like 90% of episode 2 written out. I wish I could record episode 2 on the same day just so we could keep talking about it. But
no, it's okay. I understand, man. No, seriously, excellent job. Hopefully everybody else has been enjoying it as well. I personally just love learning more about the Renaissance, and I feel like it has this legendary status where it feels larger than life a lot of times, especially when you go to museums and you see work by somebody like Caravaggio, who's one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. And it feels like this person was not human. So it's amazing to me to learn this kind of stuff because it feels like it humanizes somebody who I didn't normally see as a human.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Even down to the point where, what was his name of his master again?
Verrocchio.
There we go. Looking at that bronze statue of Da Vinci and going, oh yeah, he was a kid.
Yeah, because you look at that point. You look at the sculpture and you're like, oh, it's a sculpture of a boy.
Yeah. And
then you're like, oh, that's a sculpture of Leonardo da Vinci. And then all of a sudden, it's kind of like if you've ever met or spent a decent amount of time with a celebrity. Like I had the pleasure of being able to meet Will Stelter, who is like one of my personal knife making heroes. He's very big in the community. And I remember like after meeting him for a while, I was like, he is a guy.
Just a guy.
Still an awesome guy. But just a guy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with Da Vinci is like people talk about Da Vinci like he is this all-knowing, like we said before, wizard of history.
Right.
When in reality, he was like very unfocused, very flirtatious and fun, and everybody would be like, man, Da Vinci, oh my God, did you see Da Vinci walking down the street? Did you see that new tunic? He was showing so much leg. Like there's just so much more to his character than just being like the bearded, wizened man,
right?
Painting.
It makes me think of like the Victorian era. If a woman showed too much ankle, they'd be like, oh, she's a scandalous lady, or whatever. Like
a saucy young maiden.
Right. And Da Vinci's doing like, dude, who wears short shorts?
Yeah, kind of.
It's like that's sort of him in Florence, like parading around.
Yeah, and
I'm the hot new artist in town.
Yeah, he was in this all senses a Renaissance man, just a multi-tool of an individual where like just because he liked math and geometry didn't mean that he didn't like arts and history and fashion and the social fun stuff, you know,
Right.
making jokes and drawing little caricatures and stuff like that. He was still a very human person,
Right.
despite his incredible level of talent.
Dude, I'm fascinated. I'm hooked. I'm excited. Any ideas thus far on how many episodes you're going to be doing on him?
I'm thinking it'll be close to 6.
Okay. I was assuming it would be like an 8-part series, to be honest, if not even more, because of the scale of it. But it's your series, man.
If you're willing to let me do 8, we might do 8. But I think we can run them into 6 because, like I said, a lot of Leonardo's content is visual. So I'm trying to find the nuggets of information I think fit best for a podcast, and then leaving some of that visual information to be more brief descriptions. That way,
Sure.
the podcasters, if you're in the car, you know, you can listen to this and be like, man, I wish I was, looking at this painting with you guys. I don't want that feeling to be for most people. You know?
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I just think about it and how, for our longtime listeners, you know that we've changed sort of formats, I guess, in that we used to do 2-hour episodes every 2 weeks. Now we're doing an hour episode every single week. And I think back to when I did Ian Fleming, that was a 6-part series, and each of those was about 2 hours long. So theoretically, that should have been a 12-part series.
Yeah.
3 full months of Ian Fleming, which again, hopefully everybody enjoyed that series and whatnot. So I don't know. For me, I get where it, in your mind, you might be going, oh, that's a lot of information. But then I also think back to when I had to do long commutes for work. I remember being frustrated that I would run out of content and being like, dang it, I wish you guys did more on some of my favorite podcasts. So I don't know if any users out there, or listeners rather, I'm thinking like my software days, any listeners out there have feedback on that. If you're like, no, keep it as brief as possible.
Yeah.
Okay, let us know. But if
Do you
you're
want
like,
me to really chew on this guy, or do you guys just want to know mostly the ins and outs?
right, which I like the fat, right? I want to chew. So, I would say, use your best judgment, but I would see no problem if you were to do an 8-part series on Leonardo da Vinci, because I think he's the type of character that is worth it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, in the grand scheme of history, I feel like there are many folks like Jack Daniel that was like, a 6-part series on him might have even been excessive. I might have been able to get it down to 5 parts. I think I was able to get it down to a pretty, manageable sort of a thing. But anyhow, seriously, man, fantastic job. Keep it up.
I'm glad you're liking it.
Yeah. So I guess we'll wrap it up here just to make sure that we can at least try to stay within an hour. So a couple things, everybody. Check us out, obviously, on all of the socials. Akiva and I usually try to give that a shout out. We are on Instagram. We're on TikTok. We're on YouTube. We are on Facebook, although I just got to be honest with you, I'm not a big Facebook person, so I struggle with it. But if you do want to listen to us on YouTube, we are on YouTube Music now. It's exactly the same as if you were listening to it on something like Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. But again, if that's sort of the format you like to go through, we are there as well. So go ahead and give us a follow if you can. Obviously, we've asked this kind of before in the past as well. If anybody does have the ability to give us a review, that is going to help us with any of our rankings and stuff. And this is a completely self-sufficient podcast right now. We are not...
We're talking about episode number. And as much as I want to say that it's all about what makes a good season, a lot of it is, we're not necessarily paid to do this yet. So I do have to make sure that I have enough free time to really dive into him. And if you guys want to support that, feel free to use the Patreon, because, every dollar counts, and the more financially stable we get through the podcast, the more in depth we can get with the characters that you love.
Absolutely.
Or that you don't know you love yet.
Absolutely, which we are going to continue to do. I'm still not going to give away the next character that I'm doing, but I'd be willing to bet that 90% of you out there would go, who is this person? Like with when I did the series on Mabel Dodge Luhan. I've rarely met a person that's gone, oh, I know her.
Yeah.
Almost every single time people go, I don't know who that is.
What I want to shoot for is the 2 types of historical characters. 1, the one that you don't know, and 2, the one that everybody says that they know, but they don't actually know.
Completely agree.
People always talk about Nelson Mandela or Gandhi or Leonardo da Vinci, and they're like, those guys, they're so famous. I mean, it's Gandhi. It's like, but do you know anything about Gandhi?
Completely agree. And one of the series that I'm eventually going to do will be on Roald Dahl. Now, that is a character that's very close in terms of timeline with Ian Fleming, so I'm going to give it quite a bit of breathing room. That's not going to be for quite a while, but he's one of those characters that I've read a lot of his books as a child, and I feel like in my mind I go, oh, I know who he is, but from the little bit that I've researched on him, the more I go, I had no idea who this person was. So great call out. Yeah, if you can support us on Patreon, please do. 99% of the time, we're just going to be on any of our socials at The Biographers, all one word. On occasion, it's going to be the.biographers. So just in case you're searching and you can't find us. But if you know what our logo looks like, it's all over the place on all of our socials.
Yeah, that's great. And also, if you want to own a piece of artisanal made, Italian artisan made work, might I suggest Metalwork by Miola, who I have no affiliation with.
Italian? Are you Italian?
Yeah.
You're everything.
Wait, did we not talk about this
You're
yet?
Jewish, you're Venezuelan,
Miola.
you're American, you're...
That's Italian. My family's from Salonika.
Very Jewish to me.
We make mandolins. No, I would have been like, Goldberg or Feinstein or something like that.
Huh. I mean, I think of somebody like Moshe Kasher, who's a comedian, one of my favorite comedians.
He was like one of the few like Israeli Jews that like his family probably never had a diaspora. Which is probably...
always thought your last name was a Jewish last name. I stand
Miola
wrong.
is Italian.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just gonna break down the family
eventually
lineage.
I'm gonna go, oh yeah, something about Vietnam, and you're gonna go, I'm Vietnamese. I'm like, what?
We're breaking it down right now. My biological father is an Italian Jew. My mother, raised Catholic, converted to Judaism. We have some Jewish lineage in that family. Her family is from Venezuela. My grandfather, on my mother's side, Scotch-Irish. Then I was raised by my Cuban stepfather, who I just call Dad because he's my dad.
Yep.
And he's Cuban and Taino. So there you go.
Wow, you are a little bit of everything, man.
I am.
You are a true American.
And then Shalena is like the other side of everything. So she's like all of like the Polynesian, Black, and Asian countries.
Interesting.
So like together, our kids are going to be very confused.
Child of the world, let's say.
That's what we kind of wanted to say. Yeah.
I love it. That's super cool. So yeah, thanks again everybody for listening. Go ahead and support us if you can, and like Akiva said, go and check out his website as well, Metalwork by Miola, which now I'm learning is an Italian last name, Meola, and you can use the code biographers at checkout and you get 10% off there, and help support Akiva's other businesses. His full-time business. He's just doing this podcast with me as the extracurricular at this point.
Yes.
Hopefully at some point maybe we can do this either full-time or you can do it half-time or whatever it ends up turning into. But again, anybody, your support is it really does help us, and we are starting to climb a little bit more and all that good stuff. But again, more support means more in-depth research and more content and all that kind of good stuff.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think that's going to do it for us. So thanks everybody for listening. We will see you next time. And as I like to say, at least I try to say at the end of most of these podcasts here, remember everybody, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today.
Have a good one.
See you next time. Bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.